The test that was not supposed to fail. The sky above Earth carried a quiet kind of threat that morning when the alien consortium announced that they would perform a military test designed to demonstrate the weakness of humanity, and they spoke, with the calm of teachers preparing to correct a student's mistake. Yet no one on Earth wanted to believe that their entire world had become a classroom for humiliation. So people gathered in front of screens in city squares, in ships and stations, and on a lonely observation platform above the Indian Ocean, where the air was thin and the waves below looked like moving glass among those people, was Ria Khan, a systems technician who used to fix broken hospital machines with old wires and bits of tape because she believed that anything could be mended. If you were patient enough beside her, was Omar, a retired engineer whose hands still carried the grease of shipyards and who carried 2 metal cups of coffee that had long since gone. Cold, the crew around them were tourists, journalists and freelancers who had come to watch what they thought would be another alien show of power. But in their hearts a strange unease had already begun to hum, because even though everyone said it was only a test, everyone also knew that humiliation can be a quieter form of war. The alien ships hung in low orbit, forming a shining ring that glowed against the curve of the planet, and through the feeds came a voice that sounded like it had been built from glass and static. It told humanity that this exercise would prove how inefficient their defenses were, and that this was a chance to observe superior design. The translation reached every language in every country, and even those who could not understand the words felt the tone. It was the voice of certainty, the sound of a power that had never been challenged before, as the drones activated lines of light spread across the sky, tracing perfect geometry that bent like silk, and everyone, watching, felt the weight of smallness the same way a sailor feels the weight of an ocean that could drown him without noticing. But Ria did not look afraid. She had the kind of mind that saw patterns inside chaos, and she noticed something strange. In the rhythm of the data feed the consortium had made public, while the crowd on the platform murmured about beauty and doom, she saw a line in the numbers that seemed to flicker like a heartbeat slightly off tempo. It was a calibration algorithm, one that should have kept the alien formation stable. Yet it was reacting oddly, as if something else had brushed against it. At that moment, a minor solar flare crossed the edge of the planet unseen by human eyes, but caught by the alien sensors, and one of the outer drones in the formation flickered and slipped out of alignment. It was a fraction of a second, a motion so quick that most screens blurred it out. Yet Ria saw it, and her hands moved before her fear could speak. She grabbed the small transmitter that tourists used for shortwave chatter, and she said, "What if we sent a ping to it, just a soft one, to see what happens?" Omar frowned because no one wanted to interfere with an alien demonstration. But curiosity is a kind of rebellion, and humans have always been terrible at obeying rules when they are scared. The transmitter buzzed, and a signal no stronger than the kind a child's toy might make leapt into the air. The ping reached the broken node, and for a brief, impossible moment, the alien network reacted to the human interference as if it were another piece of itself. The outer ring adjusted, burned a little energy, and the formation quivered again. That was all it took for the illusion of perfection to crack. Every camera on Earth saw the shimmer, and for the first time the alien test looked less like a flawless performance and more like a system trying to cover a mistake. Within seconds, the translation feed stuttered. The alien voice paused as if uncertain how to narrate improvisation, because improvisation was not supposed to happen. The humans on the platform began to laugh, not out of arrogance but out of pure relief that something so untouchable could still stumble. Ria's laugh was half shock, half disbelief, and somewhere in a control room in orbit, alien analysts began rewriting lines of code because they had just learned that humans did not always follow scripts. When the feed resumed, the voice was sharper, colder, promising that this incident would be investigated and corrected. Yet the moment had already escaped the aliens' control. The footage of Ria's small action reached millions within minutes, and people who had watched in silence now talked with a different tone. They said maybe they were not completely helpless. Maybe the great machines above could be confused. Maybe the impossible could be tilted just a little, and that was enough to change the rhythm of fear in every living room and bunker across the planet. Governments started calling emergency meetings. The military checked systems. The scientists replayed recordings to confirm the anomaly. and every small independent operator in space began to whisper about coordination. Rhea sat on the deck, her hands shaking because she could not understand what she had done. She had not meant to fight anyone, she had only wanted to see if the machine could notice a joke. But now the entire planet was breathing differently. Omar handed her the coffee, and said quietly that the sky had blinked, and that when gods blink, mortals begin to imagine maybe they can reach the heavens too. They sat under the pale shimmer of the ring that now seemed less like a crown, and more like a net, stretched too thin, and above them the alien systems recalibrated with a kind of irritation, as if they had been interrupted in the middle of a speech. That night humanity did not sleep much. There were meetings and transmissions in every capital, ships in orbit, repositioned, satellites recalibrated, and across forums and pirate channels, people began to share one sentence that became a slogan. The test was not meant to fail, and yet it had trembled. And if a test can tremble, then maybe it can break the alien consortium. Announced they would repeat the demonstration in 3 days to restore order and to prove their superiority. But no one heard it the same way anymore. The announcement sounded like a challenge, and the humans began to prepare. They began to gather codes, medals, and plans as if they were athletes before a game. Rhea looked at the stars and whispered that she would not let the next test be quiet, that this time the sky would listen, and for the first time the human race felt the warmth of defiance, instead of the chill of fear as they looked upward and saw not a wall of power, but a mirror showing their own reflection growing brighter by the second, improvised arms and loud voices. The second morning after the failed alien test began with rain, falling over the shipyards of Karachi, and with it came the restless hum of machines that had not slept, because the people who worked there refused to go home. The news of the broken formation had spread faster than any command could contain, and now every nation, every small collective, and every stubborn mechanic with a welding torch wanted to see how far they could push the mistake the aliens had made. Governments argued about responsibility and protocol. But the truth was that the event had escaped politics. It belonged now to the noise and heartbeat of humanity. Rhea Khan stood in a crowded hangar, surrounded by old satellite parts and thrumming engines as messages from across the planet scrolled across screens. People wanted her to explain what she had done, and she could only say that she had been curious. They called her the spark of the sky. But she laughed and said she was just a technician who got lucky. Still, the name stayed, and so did the idea that luck was a kind of human weapon. Omar worked beside her now, his old hands steady over circuits as he whispered that this was how every great invention began, not with planning but with stubborn questions. The hangar smelled of oil and sweat and recycled air, and over the speakers came voices from cities, continents apart, groups of engineers in Ghana, hackers in Tokyo, miners in Chile, all trying to find the weakness in the alien algorithms, because what had once been a lesson from the consortium had become a challenge for every bright, restless human mind. They started calling the project the warm-up, because it sounded like mockery, and also because it carried a promise that this was only the beginning. Every tool, every spare part, every scrap of metal had purpose now. Children collected drone batteries, farmers dug up old radios, soldiers tested salvaged artillery shells. The planet was moving like one organism, learning how to stretch before the real fight. Rhea watched the data feeds from the alien relay stations that circled Earth. Their patterns had changed, slightly faster, tighter, more cautious. The consortium had noticed the shift in human behavior, but they still underestimated the intent. They assumed humanity was reacting out of fear, when in truth they were reacting out of insult. Fear bends, insult sharpens, and it sharpened every workshop, every lab, every factory, and secret military bases and forgotten warehouses. People who had never met now worked with the same rhythm. Their language is different, but their heartbeat one. Rhea sent out blueprints for a pulse generator, small enough to fit on a satellite shell designed to mimic the resonance that had confused the alien ring in the first place. Within hours, versions of it appeared across the globe, modified, adapted, and renamed with local pride. Some called it the Khan Pulse. Others simply called it the Laugh, because it was born from humor. The alien analysts watched this spread and filed it under human instability. They believed the scattered coordination meant weakness. What they did not understand was that this chaos was humanity's pattern. It was how humans solved every impossible problem by turning disorder into art. Omar explained it best one night while adjusting the wiring of a communication relay. He said humans do not win by strength. They win by rhythm when you push them. They start to move together, not by command, but by instinct. And once they start dancing, to the same rhythm, no empire can stop the motion. Rhea listened and smiled because she felt that rhythm under her skin too, a pulsing sense that the world was not ending but waking up. Across the ocean in an underground command center, an emergency, Council tried to regain control of the situation. The generals wanted to plan a counter-demonstration, something official to prove humanity was still disciplined. The scientists wanted to study before acting. But the people wanted motion. They could not sit still and wait 3 days. The time the aliens had given for their next test felt like a heartbeat countdown, and everyone wanted to be ready. So the plan that emerged was not one plan, but thousands, local defense groups, private companies, freelance hackers all agreed on one simple principle when the aliens come back. Do not let them perform without interruption. Fill the sky with noise. Rhea received transmissions of laughter from pilots who said they would use their navigation lights. To confuse targeting systems, farmers promised to broadcast radio noise from every tractor in the fields. School children planned to chant coordinates into microphones. Just to make the data ugly, humanity was preparing a song of interference. Omar kept repeating that it was not about winning yet. It was about proving that humans would not stand silent under demonstration, and that defiance itself was victory in a world told to be quiet. Rhea felt the same. She wanted the aliens to understand that humans do not respond to pressure with stillness, they respond with creation. The hangar around her filled with volunteers, artists, and engineers side by side, painting slogans on the sides of drones and supply crates. One of the phrases said, "If it is a test, we will mark it," and below it someone added, "Let the examiners tremble." She smiled at that because it captured everything they felt. When night fell, the lights from the shipyards reflected off the clouds, turning the sky into molten gold, and the world below hummed with activity. Somewhere in space, the consortium ships observed, and their internal communications grew tense. They debated whether to cancel the next test because the human noise threatened to ruin the data, yet pride held them steady. They wanted to prove that the first anomaly had been a fluke, so they prepared to double the power output of their drones, unaware that every increase in their precision made them more predictable, and every measure of control created a rhythm humans could read. The warm-up had begun, and it was not just about machines, it was about morale. It was about rediscovering that humans did not need to be the strongest to be the most dangerous. In the final hours before dawn, Rhea stood outside on the platform watching the stars that were no longer silent. She thought of her brother who used to say that humanity's curse and gift were the same, that they always turned fear into play. She felt that truth now in the air, in the humming. Wires in the heartbeat of a planet that refused to bow. The alien test was scheduled to resume in 6 hours, but the world was already moving faster. People in Brazil had built new pulse nodes. Fishermen in Norway had strapped transmitters to buoys. Soldiers in deserts tuned radar dishes like instruments. The entire planet had become a choir without conductor, and their song was interference and rebellion. Rhea looked up as the first light of morning touched the horizon. She closed her eyes and imagined the alien analysts watching, confused by the chaos below. She hoped they would keep underestimating them, because surprise was the only weapon they truly had. Omar joined her and handed a cup of fresh coffee, and said quietly, "We are not preparing for their test anymore, Rhea. We are preparing for our own," and that sentence felt like prophecy. The hangar behind them roared with laughter and sparks as workers shouted over engines and generators. The smell of hot metal filled the air. The world was alive. The countdown was burning, and somewhere beyond the atmosphere, the consortium ships aligned for what they thought would be a demonstration. But what humanity now called the warm-up routine had already begun, and nothing could stop it anymore, because the people of Earth had discovered that defiance was a muscle, and every time they used it, they grew stronger and more human than ever before. Probe and Price. The day the second alien test began, the planet was awake in every corner, from mountain villages to orbital stations. The air was alive with tension that tasted like electricity. The alien consortium announced that they would repeat the demonstration to correct the anomaly and prove once again that human resistance was meaningless. They spoke through crystal signals that filled every communication band with a calm arrogance. But this time humanity was not listening in silence. This time they were ready. The warm-up routine, as people had named it, had become more than an act of defiance. It had become a rhythm of life. Cities were alive with the hum of generators. Shipyards rang with the sound of welding, and coding labs glowed through the night as hands and minds worked in perfect chaos to confuse the sky. Ria Khan stood in the control hub built inside what used to be a cargo port. It was no longer a workplace. It was the heart of a global pulse network. Lines of code and maps of satellites danced on screens as operators shouted coordinates. She was not a soldier or an officer, yet every decision passed through her. She had become the voice that others trusted because her instinct had not failed so far. Omar was beside her, his weathered hands tapping through manual calibration because machines still needed human touch. The first ping came at sunrise when the alien formation appeared above the Pacific. It shimmered like a crown of light, tightening in geometry as drones unfolded and began their sequence. But the humans had learned that perfection could be broken if you hit it at the right beat. The global interference wave started like a whisper, short pings from hundreds of ground relays, children's toys, radios, mining lasers, all releasing fragments of rhythm into the sky at slightly different times. What looked like static to human eyes was chaos to the alien formation, because their systems relied on flawless synchronization. The alien voice returned again through the feed, commanding silence, warning that this act violated the protocol of the test, but the warning only fueled the noise. Humanity had learned how to turn defiance into an art form. Soon thousands of pulse signals created a living storm of resonance above the planet. The alien drones began to correct for the interference, consuming energy at a speed their programmers had not predicted. Ria watched the readings with her heart racing as numbers spiked across the screen. Omar whispered that they were pushing it too hard, but she could see the opening forming the same way she had seen it the first time one of the outer drones was losing sync, and she called for all pulse generators in that sector to increase output. She spoke with calm precision, and people obeyed, not because of orders, but because they wanted to feel part of something larger. The world united not through power but through purpose. The alien formation flickered again. One node broke, orbit, a second lagged behind, and suddenly the perfect ring cracked like glass under vibration across the globe. Cheers erupted, but they faded almost as quickly when new data appeared. The aliens were deploying probes, small autonomous machines descending into the atmosphere in clusters. Their mission unknown, but their intent clear: retaliation. The probes entered at hypersonic speed, tracing fire across the clouds. Their impact zones spread across the oceans and deserts. People watched in awe as the night sky lit up like falling stars, only to realize these were not stars. They were precision devices, meant to seek and silence the interference nodes within minutes. The first reports came from coastal regions where communication towers flickered and died. Entire sectors went dark. Omar turned to Ria and said quietly, "This is the price for the song," but she did not look away. She only replied, "Then we sing louder," and ordered the fallback relays to activate the backup systems hidden in old satellites and repurposed weather balloons. The probes were fast, but humanity was faster. Improvisation was their shield. Ships at sea used reflective panels to mislead tracking sensors. Drone pilots used smoke and mirrors to create false heat signatures. Teenagers hacked navigation systems and redirected probe trajectories into the ocean. It was a war fought with creativity. Not weapons, yet it was still war. And war always takes something back. In one of the outer cities, a relay station built by volunteers was struck. A flash of light erased the structure, and with it dozens of people who had been part of the network. The feed went silent. Ria froze when she saw the data gap, her hands trembling. Omar placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Every note has a cost, and we knew that." But the silence that followed was heavier than words. For the first time since the warm-up began, she felt the real weight of what defiance meant. Still, the world refused to stop across continents. The signals kept flowing, some weak, some powerful, all united in their rhythm. Even as probes hunted them down, new ones appeared. It was chaos, pure and human and unstoppable. The alien voice returned again, this time. Less calm. It demanded compliance. Declared that continued resistance would be met with full correction. But the message carried a tone. Humans recognized frustration, The aliens had not planned for stubbornness, they had not planned for species that could lose and still smile. Rhea looked at the feed and saw. The alien algorithm strained to compensate. She whispered under her breath that they were learning to bleed energy. And that was victory enough. Hours passed. The probes began to retreat. Not because of mercy, but because their energy reserves were draining. Faster than expected, the formation above Earth dimmed slightly. A visible exhaustion in the machines that once looked invincible. The planet below was scarred but proud streets filled with people who looked upward not in fear, but with the quiet certainty that they had survived something impossible. Rhea sat beside the control table exhausted beyond words, yet alive with purpose. Omar handed her a data pad, showing the loss reports. She read the names, and felt each one cut through her butt. When she reached the bottom of the list, she smiled faintly, not from joy but from recognition. Every person lost had become part of the pattern that now defined humanity. That evening, when the feeds went silent and the alien ships moved back into higher orbit, the world began to count its damage and its strength. The media called it the second test, but people everywhere called it the warm-up victory, though it had cost too much to celebrate properly in the silence of the control hub. Rhea stared at the dark sky and felt the ache of absence. The people they had lost, the families waiting, the voices gone. But she also felt the pulse of something deeper, spreading through the species. It was not just rebellion. Now it was faith, not blind. Faith in power, but faith in their own ability to stand up when told to kneel. She realized the aliens had made a mistake more dangerous than any technical flaw they had made. Humanity believe in itself. Omar joined her as the last relay lights flickered. On the horizon, he said softly, "They will come again, and next time it will not be a test," and she nodded because she already knew it. The probes had shown the intent. The next move would be real war. But fear did not return. Instead, there was focus, determination, and a strange, quiet pride. She turned to him and said, "We have already started the lesson. The test was supposed to crush us, but it only taught us how to fight back." And for the first time, the words felt heavier than promises. They felt like prophecy. The alien ships glowed faintly above the clouds as if watching the defiant planet below, and in that faint light, humanity prepared for whatever came next, not as victims, but as students who had surpassed their teachers, ready to turn every blow into another step of their warm-up routine. When the sky trembled, the third dawn after the probes fell was not peaceful. Though the horizon burned gold across the oceans and cities hummed with rebuilding, the sky above carried an unease that even the strongest hearts could feel, as if the very air remembered what it had seen. Rhea Khan stood on the observation deck of the orbital ring Atlas station and watched the endless swirl of clouds below the planet, still alive, still loud, still unbroken, yet something inside her whispered that the next silence from the stars would not be empty. It would be deliberate. Omar was beside her, eyes fixed on a distant shimmer in the void. He did not speak at first because words felt like lies when the unknown watched you back. All around the world, humanity had begun to call themselves a single unit, not by flag or nation, but by pulse. The pulse was what they called the New Alliance, a network that ignored borders, governments, and rivalries. Built from the remnants of those who had fought during the warm-up routine, they worked with frantic determination, converting every satellite and abandoned station into pieces of a larger machine, one that would never sleep again in underground. Hangars engineers tested graviton disruptors using scrap tech reverse, engineered from the alien wreckage salvaged from the failed probes. The young ones who had grown up through war did not flinch when metals screamed or circuits burned. They had seen worse. They had seen the sky fall and rise again. Rhea felt the pressure of leadership more than ever, though she had never asked for it. People listened to her because she spoke like she believed every word, not because she was certain, but because she refused to show fear when the alien signal returned. It came not in light or sound, but through gravity itself, a silent tremor that rippled across oceans and mountains. Sensors everywhere went wild, recording impossible spikes as the planet's magnetic field warped for a fraction of a second. And then came the image, not broadcasted but burned directly into the neural network of every person connected to the pulse. A figure of pure light shaped roughly like a being, but shifting endlessly. It spoke in tones that were not words, but everyone understood the meaning. The consortium demanded surrender again, not for the test, but for survival. They claimed the experiments had shown that humanity was too unstable to coexist within the galactic order and thus needed correction. The message struck like thunder, yet humanity did not bow. Instead, laughter echoed through the underground hubs and digital networks. Messages flashed across the world saying, "If survival requires obedience, then we choose extinction over silence." Rhea, however, saw something deeper within the transmission, the instability, the noise behind the message. She realized the consortium was not a singular will, but a coalition of species, each with their own agendas, and cracks. She felt it in the rhythm of the signal. Small inconsistencies like hesitation in an otherwise perfect song. And that hesitation was a weapon if used correctly. In the following days, she gathered the brightest minds across the network. Not generals, not politicians, but hackers, poets, mathematicians, and children who could see patterns adults missed. They studied the alien rhythm, building models of its oscillations, mapping its heartbeats with precision, until they found the flaw. Every signal, no matter how strong, carried emotion through its frequency. Fear, anger, certainty, doubt, and within this alien perfection, there was something like fear. The aliens feared chaos because they could not control it, and chaos was what humanity had in endless supply. So Rhea made a plan not to attack, not to hide, but to speak back in their own language. She called it the Echo Protocol. The Echo Protocol began as a whisper sent through old satellites and relay nodes, each signal carrying fragments of coded noise crafted to mimic the emotional resonance of the alien transmissions. The goal was simple: to make the consortium doubt itself, to confuse the perfect harmony of its network by injecting imperfection, the same way a grain of sand breaks a machine. Within days, the alien formations began to flicker. Sensors showed that they were communicating more frequently, as if trying to verify what was true and what was illusion. Omar watched the data unfold with disbelief and said softly, "They are arguing among themselves." Rhea smiled because that was exactly what she wanted. But no war is won without retaliation, and the sky soon trembled once more, this time not with probes but with something colossal. The aliens deployed what appeared to be a single structure, though its scale defied comprehension. A ring the size of continents descending from the void, glowing with shifting light. Its edges cut through the clouds as it stabilized above the equator. Sensors named it the Arbiter, and its purpose was clear: total evaluation and correction. The world held its breath when the ring began to emit pulses of energy that rewrote atmospheric patterns, creating storms that obeyed no natural law. Continents were cloaked in electric. Rain in cities flickered beneath the chaotic sky. It was not an attack, it was a statement, a display of control. Yet within that storm, humanity found rhythm again. Rhea coordinated the planetary grid into a symphony of interference, combining human technology and instinctual timing. She ordered every resonance generator to align with the alien pulses, but slightly out of phase. The result was a rolling wave of energy that caused the ring to stutter for brief seconds, and those seconds were all they needed. Drones launched from repurposed cargo ships carrying improvised EMP charges powered by old reactor cores. Their pilots volunteers who knew they might not return. They called themselves the Discord Fleet, not because they wanted victory, but because they wanted to remind the sky that humans never played by someone else's tune. The attack was madness, organized chaos, yet it worked for a heartbeat. The Arbiter flickered again, its smooth harmony interrupted by the messy, unpredictable pulse of human resistance. The consortium responded immediately, launching beams of concentrated energy that vaporized half the fleet, but the damage was done. The echo inside the alien network deepened as if their own control mechanisms were turning against them. Rhea watched from Atlas Station as the readings danced across the board. The ring began to destabilize its edges, bending like molten glass. Omar shouted that if it fell, it would burn the atmosphere itself. But Rhea said quietly, "It won't. Fall, it will flee." And she was right. The Arbiter shimmered once more and then vanished, pulled back into the void, leaving behind a sky that was broken yet beautiful. In the silence that followed, the world looked up, not with fear but with awe. Lightning. Storms rolled across the planet for days, and strange auroras painted the night sky. People said it was the Earth singing back to the universe. Rhea stood at the viewport of Atlas Station and whispered that they had survived the third test, though she knew deep down it had not truly been a test anymore. It was the first battle of something larger, something inevitable. The aliens had learned that humanity was not a variable to measure, but a force to reckon with. Omar approached her holding a datapad filled with transmissions intercepted after the event. The Alien Council was divided, half arguing for eradication, half for observation, and a small faction arguing for something none had dared speak: coexistence. Rhea read the data and felt something stir inside her. Not relief, not triumph, but purpose. The warm-up. Routine was over. The real game had begun. The species that had been created to adapt was now adapting, faster than any the universe had seen. And as the stars shimmered outside, she smiled faintly and said, "Let them come again, for every test they bring will only make us stronger. And one day, we will be the ones giving the lessons." The day the void bled. Light. When the Arbiter vanished, the world should have celebrated. Yet celebration felt hollow, because every person could sense that this silence was not peace, it was calculation. The stars were watching, weighing, and preparing to strike again, and humanity now stood not as a single planet, but as a force scattered across the orbits of moons and stations, unified by stubborn will and a shared defiance. Rhea Khan sat within the command deck of Atlas Station, the hum of the generators echoing in her bones while messages from every colony flooded the network. The reports all carried the same rhythm: confusion, awe, and a strange quiet pride. For the first time since the tests began, humans had not merely survived, they had forced the enemy to retreat, and that knowledge burned through the pulse like wildfire. Omar leaned over the central console, his hands blackened from long hours rerouting power conduits. He had not slept since the Arbiter's descent, yet his eyes gleamed with the kind of exhaustion that borders on revelation. He said, "The aliens are hurt not physically, but in what they call order. We broke their pattern." Rhea nodded slowly, watching the holographic displays twist and shimmer with fragments of intercepted transmissions. It seemed the consortium's once unified frequency now carried irregular beats and waves of disagreement. She could feel it in her chest like a second heartbeat, one that belonged not to the Earth, but to something vast and distant across the colonies. New voices rose, not of despair, but of creation. Engineers, poets, soldiers, and thinkers gathered to shape what they called the Iron Choir, a fusion of music and science where signal became weapon and rhythm became armor. They studied how emotion could alter frequency, how the heart could deflect logic, and they crafted weapons not of destruction but of confusion. Their machines sang instead of fired, their frequencies bent instead of broke. The aliens who believed in perfect control found themselves haunted by human sound waves filled with chaos and meaning. Rhea listened to the first activation of the Iron Choir, a low hum spreading through the orbital corridors until every wall seemed to breathe. The song was raw, imperfect, beautiful, she felt. Tears sting her eyes because for the first time humanity had found its true language. But beauty often invites fury, and the response came swiftly. The void above Mars rippled open like torn fabric, and from it emerged the Phalanx Array, a fleet of machines that defied classification. They were neither ships nor living things, but something in between: liquid metal threaded with violet light, their movements mathematical, yet disturbingly graceful. Their purpose simple: erase the source of the echo and silence the pulse forever. The first human patrols that engaged the Phalanx vanished without trace. Only static returning their sacrifice, however, was not in vain. The data they transmitted before being destroyed revealed that the enemy used entangled quantum fields to coordinate their attacks, meaning that if humans could disrupt that field even slightly, the entire formation would falter. Rhea saw opportunity where others saw doom. She convened a council across the network, inviting every strategist and dreamer willing to listen. The plan that emerged was reckless, bordering on impossible. They would use the Iron Choir to broadcast a counter-signal, not from Earth, but from within the Phalanx itself. Someone would have to enter, the swarm carrying a resonance generator, and trigger it manually. knowing that the feedback would annihilate anything within the field before it collapsed. Omar volunteered before anyone else could speak, his voice steady and calm. He said, "This is what I was born to do." Rhea wanted to refuse. She wanted to command someone else to go. But leadership had taught her that courage is not about control. It is about faith. Preparation took 3 days during which humanity held its breath. Ships were stripped for parts, drones were repurposed into decoys. Entire cities donated their energy grids to fuel the single generator that would carry the Iron Choir's final note. Rhea walked through the hangar where Omar's vessel waited, a small craft. Patched together from old cargo haulers and alien wreck fragments, she traced her fingers along its scorched hull and whispered that if he made it back, the world would owe him more than history could hold. He smiled and said, "If I do not make it back, then at least history will know we tried." When the operation began, every channel of the pulse went silent, except for the steady rhythm of Omar's heartbeat transmitted through his ship's sensors as he entered the black storm of the phalanx. The swarm closed around him like a metallic ocean rippling with violet light, their movements so synchronized that they seemed to breathe as one. His ship shook under the gravitational waves, yet he kept moving, guided not by instruments but by instinct. Following the faint harmonic flaws in their formation, he could hear their signal singing in his mind. Perfect, endless unity, and he knew that this was what terrified them most. The sound of imperfection. So he began to hum a human tune. Something simple he remembered from Earth, a song his mother used to sing when the world still had oceans instead of stations. The alien signal faltered a fraction of a second, and that was enough. He triggered the generator, a pulse of raw emotion encoded in energy spreading through the swarm at the speed of light. It was not destruction. In the usual sense, it was dissonance. Every phalanx unit began to vibrate against itself, unable to reconcile perfection with chaos. Omar's systems overloaded as the swarm folded inward, tearing its own field apart. Rhea watched from Atlas Station, her hands gripping the console until her knuckles bled. The readings went wild. Entire regions of space flickered with unstable light. Then everything went white. When the glare faded, the void was empty. The phalanx gone. Omar's ship silent for long minutes. The pulse remained quiet, as if the entire species waited to exhale. Then a faint signal emerged, his voice weak but alive. He said, "They are not gods. They are just afraid," and then the signal cut off completely, leaving only the resonance of his final note echoing through the network. Rhea stood frozen, unable to speak. The data showed the quantum field collapsing in a cascade that spread across systems. The consortium's fleets withdrawing, their coherence unraveling one after another. The attack on Mars never came. The stars grew still again. The victory cost them more than numbers could tell. Thousands of lives lost, colonies drained of energy, and atmosphere scorched from the magnetic backlash, yet in that ruin there was triumph. People danced in the dark under skies painted by auroras of fractured radiation, singing the same imperfect song Omar had hummed, the one that had broken the phalanx. Rhea looked out at the Earth glowing faintly through the upper clouds and whispered that the universe had finally heard humanity's voice. It was not the loudest or the purest, but it was the one that would not fade. In the following weeks, messages from deep space began to arrive, fragments of alien transmissions, not hostile, but questioning small groups within the consortium seeking communication rather than conflict. Asking how humans had done what logic said was impossible, Rhea replied, not with weapons, but with a single line of code carrying Omar's melody, transformed into data. When the aliens decoded it, they would hear not words, but emotion, the living pulse of a species that refused to be erased. And though she did not know if they would understand, she knew that somewhere out there the void itself now carried a trace of human imperfection. The day the void bled, light became a symbol written on every wall and transmitted across every channel. Humans realized they had changed the rules of existence forever. The warm-up routine was no longer a test, it was the birth of a legend, and as the stars blinked like distant embers, Rhea whispered that this was only the middle of the story, because if the universe had learned anything, it was that humanity always turned survival into art, and every defeat into a new beginning, fractures in faith. The months after the phalanx collapse were heavy with silence. the kind that seeps into bones and dreams and makes even the strongest. Hearts tremble not from fear but from memory. Earth had survived what was meant to end it. The skies burned clean. The oceans regained color. Yet no one could rest because victory had come with a shadow. The pulse still connected every mind, every colony, but beneath its rhythm was a faint, irregular beat. Something fragile and uncertain like the aftershock of a wound that had not yet healed. Rhea Khan stood on the edge of Atlas Station, gazing into the black horizon where the stars flickered. As if whispering secrets, she could almost feel Omar's last heartbeat echoing through the network. His melody had become humanity's anthem. Played in schools, echoed in markets, and broadcast to the farthest colonies. Yet for her, it was a ghost that refused to fade. The council gathered in the orbital core to decide what came next. Delegates from every surviving colony floated in holographic form around the great chamber, their faces illuminated by the blue light of the pulse projector. There was unity in symbol but division in soul. Some believed the war was over, that the aliens would never dare return after their perfect machines had fallen. Others argued that this was merely an intermission, that the consortium would regroup and come back not to test, but to annihilate. Rhea listened to them all without speaking until the arguments turned from strategy to fear. Humans had begun to mistrust their own creation, the pulse itself. Some said the network was too strong, too connected, that it no longer served people, but controlled them. Subtle fluctuations in emotion had begun to spread across planets' entire cities, feeling sorrow or joy in unison, as if individuality was dissolving. Into the rhythm of survival, Rhea understood the danger. Yet she also knew the truth. The pulse was not control. It was empathy. It allowed humanity to understand what it had always lacked: collective feeling. She stood before the council and spoke in a voice that carried through the static, saying, "The pulse is our reflection. It shows us what we are afraid to face alone. It does not chain us. It reminds us that we are one." The silence that followed was deep enough to make even the hum of the generators sound distant. For a moment she thought they might listen. But politics is a slower poison than fear, and factions formed beneath polite words. The Iron Choir continued their research, seeking to refine their weaponized harmony, while a group known as the Reclaimers demanded the disconnection of all networks, believing that humanity should return to isolation and rebuild without interference. The first fracture came on Titan Colony, where an experimental relay station designed to amplify the pulse overloaded during testing, killing thousands. The Reclaimers blamed the Iron Choir, calling them reckless dreamers, playing with godlike forces. While the choir insisted that sabotage had caused the overload, Rhea sent envoys to investigate. But none returned. Titan's transmissions ceased, and rumors spread that the colony had gone dark, deliberately cutting itself from the pulse. Soon other colonies followed, some seeking independence, others fearing invisible manipulation. Within days, humanity's unity began to splinter the same way the consortium once had. Rhea could not sleep. The nights on Atlas were long, filled with the whisper of orbiting debris striking the outer hull. She would walk alone through the observation corridors, watching Earth revolve below, and wonder if all their struggle had simply built another kind of cage. Omar's absence felt heavier now, because he had been the one who believed chaos could be beautiful without him. The rhythm of the pulse seemed colder, more mechanical. She began to hear distortions, faint echoes of voices speaking words she did not understand. Sometimes she thought it was interference from alien frequencies. Other times she feared it was something deeper, a reflection of humanity's. Doubt made real one evening as she watched the aurora sweep across the upper atmosphere. A message came through the secure channel. It carried no identification, just a sequence of harmonic pulses. When decoded, it formed a message written in human language saying, "We found the edge of the field and we are not alone." The signal originated from the far side of the moon where no active base was registered. Rhea ordered a stealth ship to investigate, but the moment it crossed the lunar shadow, contact was lost for hours until finally a transmission returned filled with static and a single visual frame. A figure of light standing on the surface, its shape shifting between human and alien forms. She recognized the same resonance that had marked the consortium communication, but twisted softer. Uncertain, it was trying to mimic human form, as if learning. The council demanded she destroy the signal, fearing it was a trick, but Rhea refused. She believed the aliens who had questioned after Omar's act might have come seeking dialogue, perhaps even truce. She sent a private reply through the same harmonic channel, embedding Omar's melody once more. The response came swiftly, not as words, but as images, human memories reflected back, fragments of history, war and laughter, love and loss, and within them she felt something impossible. The aliens were feeling through the pulse. They were learning emotion. The one thing they had never understood. That realization shook her to the core, because it meant their enemy was changing. But change rarely comes without consequence, and soon chaos erupted. The Reclaimers staged an attack on Atlas, claiming Rhea had betrayed humanity. By communicating with the enemy their ships appeared from the dark side of orbit, firing EMP bursts that crippled the outer defenses. Explosions rippled along the station's surface, sending fragments into space. Alarm screamed through the corridors while the pulse flared with panic. Rhea took control of the command deck, ordering non-lethal defense drones to intercept the attackers. She refused to fight humans, even as they fired upon her. Omar's words haunted her. "We are not gods. We are just afraid." And she knew fear was the real enemy. The battle was brief but brutal. Atlas survived, though scarred. Half the station burned and thousands injured when the dust settled. Rhea stood among the wreckage, staring at the broken core of the pulse projector, its light flickering weakly. She realized that humanity was standing at the same threshold as the aliens once had faced, with a choice between control and compassion, between silence and understanding. She gathered what remained of the council, not in the chambers of command, but in the open observatory. Where Earth glowed below, she spoke not as a leader, but as one voice among billions. She said, "We began this as a test. They wanted to measure our limits, but we learned something they never understood. That strength is not found in perfection, but in connection. We have seen what fear makes of gods, and we will not become them." The message spread through every channel, every colony. And for the first time since Titan fell, the pulse harmonized again across the system. The tension eased, as though the universe itself exhaled. Rhea felt tears rise unbidden, because she knew what it meant. They were not finished. Not yet. The war might still come, but humanity had survived itself. And that was the harder victory. In the quiet that followed, as the stars shimmered beyond the shattered windows, she heard a faint melody drifting through the pulse, Omar's song. Changing, evolving, woven now with alien undertones. Something new, something shared, and she whispered into the void that maybe this was what he meant all along, that chaos could build bridges where logic built walls. And in that moment she felt faith return. Not blind faith, but the kind forged in fire. The kind that refused to die. The fractures remained, but they no longer bled. They had become the veins through which hope flowed. And as Atlas orbited once more into the sunrise, Rhea stood tall, watching the light spread across the planet below, knowing that the next step would decide not just humanity's fate, but the soul of every being who had ever looked at the stars and wondered what it meant to be alive. Dawn of human will. The dawn that rose over Earth that day was not ordinary. It was deeper, more radiant, as though the sky itself knew something had shifted forever. Rhea Khan stood in the observation bay of Atlas Station, her reflection dim against the glass and the curve of the blue planet glowing beneath her. The pulse had stabilized at last, no longer trembling between chaos and silence. It thrummed now with a steady heartbeat that spanned across the colonies and outposts, a rhythm born not of technology, but of shared memory. Every human connected through it felt the same emotion. Not fear, not triumph, but readiness. The kind that came before the next great storm. For months after the rebellion of the Reclaimers, humanity had rebuilt slower but stronger. Every ship that had once carried weapons now carried builders. Every city that had once hidden underground now rose toward the sky again. The air was cleaner, the storms calmer, and yet no one believed the peace would last, because the stars still whispered messages, and the watchers beyond the void had not vanished. The aliens the consortium had fractured during their last confrontation. Some demanded destruction. Others observed from afar. A few had begun sending harmonic transmissions, weak, hesitant but filled with curiosity. Ria listened to each one as if hearing the first words of a child learning to speak. Omar's melody still pulsed through the network, though its origin had long faded from any source. It was now self-sustaining, a living current that fed the pulse itself. Scientists tried to define it, but failed. It was as if his sacrifice had merged with the energy field, giving the entire species a voice that could never be silenced. Ria often wondered if he could still feel them, somehow part of that endless flow, somewhere beyond the stars. One evening, while reviewing deep space telemetry, a pattern appeared on her screen, a familiar gravitational fluctuation, the same resonance the consortium used, but this time it did not carry aggression. It carried rhythm, a syncopated pulse matching Omar's melody but altered softer. She felt it in her chest like a whisper saying, "We are coming not as conquerors, not as judges, but as learners." She summoned the council immediately. The chamber was filled with light as holographic faces materialized, each bearing the same mixture of fear and awe. The decision before them was greater than any battle, whether to respond with open communication or prepare for another war. Some argued that it was a trick, a final test meant to expose their vulnerability. Others said it was the first real chance for peace. Ria listened quietly, her hands clasped behind her back as debates grew louder, until finally she spoke, saying, "Every war ends when one side chooses understanding, and if we are truly human, we must be the ones to choose it." Her words rippled through the pulse, silencing the arguments, and for the first time in years no one objected, they simply nodded. The preparations for first contact began not in secret, but in full view of every citizen across the network. Humanity would not hide this time. They built a meeting place not on Earth but between worlds, a vast construct orbiting the moon, shaped like a ring of mirrors and living gardens, powered by solar wings that unfolded like petals. It was named the Concord Dawn. Symbolizing both agreement and renewal, the work took months. Thousands volunteered from every colony, engineers, artists, and farmers working side by side. It became a creation of unity, not warships, guarded it only for safety, never aggression. And as it grew brighter each day, so did the hearts of those who watched it from below. When the signal came, it was simple, a harmonic tone spreading through the pulse that resonated with every living being. The alien ships emerged slowly from the darkness, vast constructs of light and motion. Unlike anything human eyes had seen before, they moved, not in formation but like dancers, each one unique yet connected by threads of energy. Instead of descending with force, they approached in silence, and orbit settled near the Concord Dawn. Their presence filled the sky with auroras that painted every horizon in colors unseen. Before humanity watched from their cities, from mountaintops, from orbit itself, holding their breath. The first meeting took place within the center chamber of the Concord. Ria stood surrounded by her people, soldiers, scientists, leaders, and civilians, waiting as a sphere of light began to take form before them, its shape flickering through countless silhouettes, until it settled into something resembling a human, not perfect, but recognizably trying to be one. The alien spoke not with sound, but with vibration that resonated through the pulse. It said, "We watched you resist. We tested your resolve. We sought perfection, and found only pain. Your imperfection sang louder than our order, and it changed us." Ria stepped forward, her voice steady as she said, "Imperfection is not weakness. It is what makes us alive. It is how we learn." The sphere brightened its energy, rippling. Like water, it replied, "Then teach us," and Ria felt the entire chamber grow silent, the pulse vibrating through everyone present. She realized this was the moment not of surrender, not of dominance, but of recognition. Two species meeting not as enemies, but as students of one another. They began to share knowledge, exchanging harmonics that translated into concepts rather than words. Humans showed them art, emotion, and the ability to find beauty in brokenness. The aliens shared sciences beyond imagination, ways to bend energy and matter through resonance together. They began crafting what they called the Lumen Accord, a covenant not written on paper but woven directly into the pulse itself. Weeks turned into months. The cooperation deepened, and the universe watched as two former foes built something entirely new. hybrid ships powered by human instinct and alien precision stations, where both species lived side by side, experimenting, learning, evolving. And yet through all this, Rhea knew it was only the beginning, because harmony is never eternal. It must be maintained. She often returned to Atlas Station, standing where she once watched battles unfold, now looking upon a sky full of light trails and calm stars. She whispered Omar's name, knowing his song had started it all. But peace came with its own kind of test as distant sectors reported anomalies, energy storms caused by overlapping frequencies. It seemed that the merging of human emotion with alien resonance had unforeseen effects, space itself bending slightly around strong feelings of unity or sorrow. It was as though the universe had begun to respond to consciousness itself. Scientists called it the resonant awakening. Poets called it the soul of the void. Rhea called a consequence. She understood that creation always carried risk, yet she smiled because risk was life. Years passed and humanity no longer stood alone. The term human expanded to include those who once were enemies, their shared pulse becoming a galactic symphony. The warm-up routine that began as a cruel experiment had become legend, spoken of in songs that crossed systems. Children learned about the test that failed to break them, and the leader who taught them to turn chaos into connection. When Rhea grew old, she returned to Earth, walking the green hills that had once been ash. The people greeted her not as commander but as elder of the pulse. She stood one last time beneath the aurora that shimmered in every color of the new dawn and felt the hum in the soil under her feet. In her final moments, she closed her eyes and heard the familiar melody rising through the air, Omar's tune still alive, still changing now, sung by countless voices, human and alien alike. She smiled, knowing that the war meant to crush humanity had instead awakened something greater than any weapon ever forged. Not domination, but understanding. Not silence, but song. And as her breath faded, she felt the pulse embrace her, a whisper spreading across stars, saying the test is over, the lesson has begun. And so the story of the warm-up routine ended, not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. The universe forever altered by one small species that refused to stay silent, by one melody born of defiance and love that taught creation itself to listen. And in the endless horizon of light and motion, humanity stood not as conquerors, but as teachers, the architects of will, the singers of dawn, the eternal symphony. The stars stretched endlessly across the horizon, their shimmer no longer distant cold fires, but living echoes of the pulse that now bound 1,000 worlds together. The song that had once been a whisper within the void had become the heartbeat of civilizations, and within that boundless rhythm humanity thrived, no longer defined by fear or war, but by creation, by the music of existence itself. The alien races that had once stood as judges and conquerors had now joined in harmony, their voices interwoven into the ever-expanding pulse, each note representing a memory, a sacrifice, a dream. Rhea Khan's legacy endured through the generations, her teachings written not in ink or data, but in the harmonics of the universe itself. Her spirit lived within every resonance, every vibration of thought that traveled through the living network. The people called her the Mother of the Dawn, and each year when the auroras bloomed above Earth, they sang her melody, a sound that could be felt even by the stars themselves. As centuries turned and empires rose and fell, humanity's form began to change. The merging of flesh and energy, of thought and light, gave birth to beings that transcended time. They were neither machine nor spirit, but something new. The Luminar, an evolution born from understanding and unity. They traveled beyond the known galaxies, leaving behind traces of brilliance like comet trails of consciousness. Entire worlds hummed with their passage, each one glowing with energy that felt like joy. The warm-up routine, once a cruel test, had become a myth retold to young minds across systems, not as a tale of war, but as the story of awakening. It reminded them that the will to rise comes not from strength, but from choice. The choice to feel, to learn, to create, and to stand even when crushed. The pulse carried these lessons further than light itself, reaching places where no traveler had gone. Its frequency, bending through dimensions, whispering humanity's defiance into the silence. in the heart of the old galaxy, a monument floated silently in the endless dark. Built from fragments of the first human ships, its surface reflected every star around it. Like a mirror at its core, burned an eternal light, a resonance crystal made from Omar's final energy. Pulse it sang endlessly the same melody that once defied extinction, now softer, purer, woven into the fabric of reality. No one guarded it, no one worshipped it, for it needed neither protection nor praise. It simply existed, a reminder that will and love could reshape the universe. On one quiet day, a luminar child approached the monument, a being of soft radiance and fluid form. It reached out its hand, and the crystal responded, glowing warmer. The melody shifted slightly, becoming new. For the first time in ages, the child smiled, its voice carrying through the cosmos, saying, "The song continues." And at that moment, the pulse across all known worlds resonated in perfect harmony, from the smallest settlement on Mars to the glowing cities of distant suns. Everything vibrated with one collective breath, and the stars themselves seemed to listen. The light that emerged then spread outward, not as a weapon, not as fire, but as memory, carrying the essence of every human who had ever lived, every victory, every tear, every act of courage, until the universe itself shimmered with remembrance. What began as a military test designed to crush the human spirit had evolved into the very mechanism that kept creation alive. The proof that even under unimaginable pressure life finds rhythm. Galaxies turned their slow eternal dance, nebulae shimmered like painted skies, and through it all, the pulse sang quietly, endlessly, weaving its melody through atoms and stars, through thought and silence, a cosmic song with no beginning and no end, carried forward by the will of one small species that refused to die, that refused to forget what it meant to feel. And somewhere in that infinite music, if you listened closely, you could still hear her voice, Ryokon's whisper carried in the vibration between stars, her final words drifting through the pulse. Not as command, not as prophecy, but as truth. We were never the test. We were the lesson. The melody rose one last time, brighter than ever before, bathing the cosmos in light until everything became one great sound of harmony, one great heartbeat echoing forever through time, the end.